Hey there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts for Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we discuss protective factors in families that promote student attendance, namely academic support for learning at home, motivational support for learning, availability of educational resources, and parental monitoring. Now, as I listen to this conversation again, I notice that what we get back to in our conversation is working with parents, not doing things to them or for them. And I think it's important to learn and understand more about the protective factors for student attendance because it can help you to know what can help parents the most. So if you're currently dealing with parents and want to build up that support needed for students in school, then this episode is for you because it can really help you to prioritize connections with families for the whole school. Some of the main topics we'll be covering include being open to different families and different family priorities, providing messaging that supports without blaming. And parents will engage in conversations and topics that interest them, so find out what interests your school's parents. At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you'll find some free restorative resources. And if you enjoy this, make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Now, let's head over to this discussion with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. The question was, how can we strengthen the protective factors for families? And the protective factors that we're looking at particularly, I'll just read them: academic support for learning, motivational support for learning, availability of educational resources, and parental monitoring. And the question really was, what are some actionable steps that we can take to address those protective factors and build them for students to attend school and then ultimately to graduate?
I think before you go ahead with any planning and next steps is really identifying what you're going to, which protective factor you want to focus on. Having a general awareness of all the protective factors is important, but if you're making a plan for action steps, you can't do those action steps for all those protective factors. Some of them may naturally fall into place as you start to make your plan, but you have to get a feel of what the community and the parents are needing support with.
So you're actually starting with some questions of the parents, and those could be restorative questions then, for example.
Right.
When you look at those protective factors, I was going to use the word assumption, but there's a recognition that perhaps there's some lacking in a parent's ability to support learning at home. This is about what we can do to help parents when they're at home with their children, to, as it says, to provide some academic support for learning with their homework and motivate them for learning and get those resources that they need, and how do we monitor them. So there's almost an assumption or belief that maybe those things aren't there. And for some students, they probably aren't. And so it's how do we work with parents to get them to realize or to understand that that's important. That's an important aspect of their educational journey, is what happens at home. Because I've had many times as a principal, parents say to me, you look after at school and I'll look after at home. You're responsible for their learning, not me. And then that opens the door to, I think we're both responsible. We're all responsible. Yes, we'll provide the work and the structure, but there's a role you can play at home to help support that. And some parents don't fully understand what their role is, or even agree that they have a role. So now we have to work with them to get them to that realization.
Right. I was just going to add to that, Steve, because the assumption can be that parents don't want to do this. When it may be that, you know what, I don't really know how to do this.
Yeah.
And that's a very different way to view things. And then you work with them, right? You're going to work with people if you believe they just don't have the tools, as opposed to they don't want to do this. Then your approach is probably going to be different.
And parenting is tough. We all have kids, and it is a tough job. And I think just recognizing that this is a challenging thing to do is really important too.
We automatically, our mind jumps to that parent who's too busy to help their kid with homework, or they're too busy, their lives are too busy, or whatever. But you know what? There's a lot of parents who are at home and do actively take a role in their children's learning, and yet they're still not doing what we would all consider maybe the best job of it. And we all think of that parent who takes over and does the project for a kid, and the kid just sits back and says, my dad will build that model or whatever it is. And what are they actually learning, and what are they learning from that? That somebody will come along and do it for me. So there's that 4 group that we have to work with. And some of them are very dedicated parents. So we can't just assume that it's just the ones who, and we'll use the word neglectful or not, who are too busy to help, or their life situation is such as they're not available to help. There are many parents who help and put tons of time into helping, but is it the right kind of help? And do they know how to do it correctly so that the child is actually taking ownership and learning?
And do we need to honor that there's people that think differently than us as well?
Yes.
For some people, they believe the formal learning and sitting at the table is done when they come home. They need to be outside playing. They need to be learning their musical instrument. They need to be doing other things. So I think it's having that open mind that there may be other ways that people are doing things that may not be the same as what we think, but they're not necessarily wrong, right?
Yes.
So when you're sharing these ideas of how to support your child at home, you have to do it in a way that here's a thought for you. Here's why we think it's beneficial, but you don't want to push them away from school further if they're already struggling with that.
We really do have to be open to the different family styles and different senses of priority while still supporting this. I think too about a family that I worked with that was in a conflict situation. I think it was a girl in grade 4 or 5. And we actually had a formal restorative conference with her and her parents and a girl that she was bullying. And part of the problem was that when she would get home, she was a latchkey kid. And so her folks weren't home because they commuted and both parents were working. And after the restorative conference, the person who had been harmed, their parents that was just, they didn't accept any responsibility. Nothing's going to change and stuff like that. And it was interesting because about a month later, the principal actually mentioned to me that the mother of the child who had caused the harm started to see some more of these kinds of things happening and actually quit her job so that she could be home to be there for her child when she came home. The other thing I think is that parents always want what's best for their kids.
Yes.
Let's start with that assumption.
Yeah,
I remember sitting at this is almost the flip side, Stan, of what you were saying, sitting at a school meeting with a little girl, probably grade 2 or 3, who had extreme OCD, a number of other issues, a bright little girl, but homework wasn't getting done. So there we are all sitting around the table with the mom and the number of professionals that were there. And mom starts to describe what homework looked like for this little girl at home, the homework time. And it was just incredible how many hours this mom was trying to put in to try and get her to do the homework because those were the school expectations and the results of that. And I remember saying, can we just call a timeout on this? Like after hearing this story, this is not what's important for this little girl. She's maintained all day at school. And now mom is having to, often those kids need to release when they get home. And mom's still trying to enforce because the school wants this to happen. So it's just that there are those individual stories we need to hear too. But I think what we were trying to get with this is how to make next steps to support parents in ways.
One of the things that a lot of parents can do, and look at those factors, and one of them is motivating support for learning. A lot of it's modeling. And we talk in restorative practice so much about modeling the behaviors that we expect. Well, modeling the learning that we expect. There was a study done many years ago of academic success and what the home looked like in terms of reading material. And they basically went into homes and they just counted books. They just counted the amount of reading material. And there was a very strong correlation between homes that had a lot of reading material, X number of books or newspapers that came into the house daily, and academic success. Because when mom and dad are reading the newspaper every day, maybe they do it on a tablet now, but when they're reading a newspaper or they read for pleasure, the students will see that. And it's a model behavior that reading is accepted, that it's something we do in this family. And those students perform better at school because we know that reading is the basis of so much of our learning. So sometimes it's not about getting more homework done or get that desk in a quiet corner and make sure. It's about just modeling that learning is important in this family and learning is something that we value. So I think we can have those conversations with parents about what's the home look like. And it's not about saying you're doing it wrong. It's tell me what happens when you get home at night. Let's talk about what happens. and asking the child, what do you think about all that? So using those restorative questions, what happens when you get home at the end of the day? And really trying to create a picture of the home and educational environment.
I just wanted to get to some practical things that we can do as schools, as principals, as teachers, as educational support staff. What are some practical things that we can do to encourage and build up those protective factors?
It's all goes without saying is education. And we know we've seen many behaviors shift over generations based on education. When you provide people with information without saying you must do this, and they see it enough, whether that's almost like a drip campaign about modeling or what does good support at home look like for academics, whatever that is. But if it's a constant messaging, people start to integrate that. Think about seat belts, think about car seats, think about all those different things that we didn't do a generation ago that have changed. And that's through information sharing.
As a principal for years, we promoted a lot of family and parenting workshops that were provided by outside agencies. Our role was simply to promote them and find some space. And other groups would come in and do these workshops. And parents were invited. And sometimes it wasn't the parents that we thought needed to be there the most. But for the most part, a lot of parents that had the time saw it as a valuable thing. And those parenting workshops weren't about lecturing parents on here's how you do it, but here's some helpful hints. What goes on in your home? Here's what we know that works. Kids would say it was either happening first thing in the morning after the kids started school, and the parents would go down the hallway to a parent room or just some kind of a conference room. Sometimes it was after school, and the organization that came in provided babysitting so the parents could take part in this. Might be an hour and a half. There's some snacks. So it was just slowly, as you said, Shelley, it's slowly changing the mindset by providing some of these workshops. And from my standpoint as a principal, I was just a facilitator. I didn't have to present. I didn't have to create anything. I just had to simply find a space and the time and promote it in our newsletters and that kind of thing. And it was valuable. A lot of parents like to come just because of the social piece. If they had young children, a lot of them are focused around that early primary age because some of those parents were at home. They might have had even younger children at home, bring them along. So these strollers would come in with 1 and 2 year olds while they're doing the parenting workshop. It became a social event. And again, it's a good place to start working with parents to inculcate in them the belief that education is important. There's something you can do, that you do have a role as a parent in academic success. It's not just about the school does all the work and then they come home and we look after them.
I love how you've both pointed out the necessity of creating a culture, an educational culture, which shifts to protective factors. And also, I think in all of that, just listening to what the concerns are of the parents, because if you listen to parents at a playground or at a hockey rink, they're talking about the stuff that matters to them. And if you can get in on those conversations, and then, as you say, Steve, provide the opportunity for people to learn about how do you get your kid to sleep? My kid's not eating properly. Stuff like that's real practical in a social type environment so that parents can connect parent to parent as well, while providing some childcare. I heard all of that too. I think that would be fantastic. Put partnerships with parents on your school staff meeting agendas. Ask restorative questions from a place of curiosity. Have conversations that inform you in school about what would help parents support learning at home. Find out more about our work at www.restorative.ca. Email me, stan@restorative.ca. And let's make the time to listen and engage with parents as our partners in learning for the sake of our students.